Hey guys, welcome to the Liberal Hivemind, a channel solely focused on exposing the abundant hypocrisy of the left. The question that I keep asking myself, I'm sure the question that a lot of you guys keep asking yourselves, is where do we go from here? And I think this is a very important question, and I want to tie it with another couple key concepts. The first one is the fact that I think the GOP is dead. The neocon establishment of old, I believe within the next couple years, within the next couple election cycles, has screwed the pooch so hard, they've engaged in such high levels of self-sabotage, it might be hard to gain power within any element of government for a long time. And you know what? I don't blame those that are disenfranchised, and I think that the GOP is dead and never want to support a GOP establishment pick ever again. I understand it. I relate to it. Honestly, I agree with you. And at the same time, with that exact notion in play, is the answer seceding? Across the world, you hear about this all the time. The UK just did Brexit. That was, in essence, seceding from the entity of the EU. If you think about Europe, it's more or less like a bunch of states under the banner of the European Union. The federal government in the US, I believe, represents in a certain way what the EU represents, and the UK got out, I think, to their benefit. In Canada, you see this all the time as well, with Quebec's attempts to secede over the last couple decades. You now have Western Canada that wants to secede from the liberal elements of the East as well, and it's a phenomenon we've seen before, but usually it's a whole lot of barking and not a lot of action. And the question is, going forward, as the GOP could potentially have sabotaged the next couple of elections, is that the only choice left? Are conservatives in Texas, per se, crazy to think that maybe they should secede from the country and create their own sovereign nation? I don't think they are, and we got to talk about this whole notion. We got to talk about the GOP, we got to talk about the establishment, we got to talk about secession, and we got to talk about what the future has in store. But before we get into any of it, please make sure to leave a like, a comment, subscribe, share the video as much as possible. We are still shadow banned by the YouTube algorithm, hidden from non-subscribed viewers. Now with that out of the way, let's roll the tape. So you know, the question that I seem to be asking myself very often recently is, how does the GOP expect to win an election ever again? It sounds hyperbolic, but how? How can they possibly win again after they've backstabbed their base so many times? And it seems even beyond just a backstab, it seems as though there's almost like a hatred, a disassociation, a level of disowning that the GOP is trying to do when it comes to Trump's base. Trump's base, however, is in fact the GOP. Tucker Carlson put it very plainly himself with this segment right over here.
The main problem, and this really is the main problem, on the right anyway, the people who run the Republican Party don't really like their own voters. And they especially don't want the voters that Trump brought. Trump brought the party's ranks noticeably downscale, from the country club to the trailer park, as they often sneer, and this horrifies them. Many Republicans in Washington now despise the people they're supposed to represent and protect. And by the way, it's not just Republican leaders who feel this way, it's our entire leadership class, it's everyone in charge. You rarely hear it spoken out loud, but this is the truth. A very specific form of intra-white loathing is at the core of the reaction to Donald Trump.
And he's totally right. And how do you move forward if the ruling class that's supposed to serve you and represent you wants absolutely nothing to do with you? It's an unsustainable relationship for both parties. They will not be able to remain in power considering they have a disdain for their actual voters, and the voters have no representation. So what does that mean? Well, it doesn't mean anything very good at all. In fact, it might mean a future of Democrat rule. Sounds like a nightmare scenario, and that's because it is. But look, in the past, we've spoken very often, especially headed into the election, Republicans were relatively united, all under one banner, and we kept talking about the fragmented left, but they're surviving under one banner. From a point of pragmatism, the notion of vote blue no matter who almost acts as the glue that keeps them together. Far-left Democrats would much rather Nancy Pelosi or any Democrat in power than any straight white Republican Christian male get anywhere near a position of power. It's pretty much that simple. Now, however, unfortunately, the serious divide is within the Republican ranks. The voters have had enough of neoconservative corporate establishment shills, corporate establishment traitors, and we're seeing it materialize on the street. Mitt Romney was just on a flight where the whole plane was going after him. Lindsey Graham, walking through DC, met with a very, very similar reaction. And so the GOP has essentially abandoned you, and in response, many have abandoned the GOP. It's principled. At the end of the day, conservatives are principled, where Democrats, who are socialists or Green Party types, will bend the knee and survive within the Democrat Party due to the fact that it's politically expedient. I think Republicans, as a core human trait, stand by their virtues a whole lot stronger. And that's why we saw what we saw in the state of Georgia. I mean, just think about it. A triple Democrat sweep in the state of Georgia is pretty much unprecedented. Going into the election, even thinking of Georgia as a swing swing states seemed completely unreasonable. In my mind, there was a higher chance that Trump lost Florida than he lost Georgia. But even in the runoffs, both Republican candidates got absolutely smoked. And that's not because of Trump. That's because they didn't support Trump and they aren't Trump and Trump wasn't on the ticket. I mean, they got smoked and receded in support in many of the key suburban areas that Trump carried. This is a repudiation, a referendum on the GOP establishment. And it's not exactly surprising considering, let's be honest, GOP candidates tend to be not exactly the brightest bunch and not exactly the most charismatic leaders. I mean, we couldn't find better than Kelly Loeffler. I think that tells the whole story now, doesn't it? And so there's been a whole lot of talk with the Texas GOP suggesting seceding from the US following the SCOTUS rejection. And even beyond that, you would imagine that those talks are getting even more heated. Will it happen? You know, probably not, but I think it should. Texas, I think the entire red wall, frankly, should secede. I mean, it's already bad enough that the GOP itself doesn't represent its people, doesn't represent the American people or its constituents. That notion is even worse when it comes to Capitol Hill. That notion is even worse when it comes to the federal government and federal agencies. They do not represent the American people. We talk a whole lot against big government. Well, the federal government is the definition of big government. Downsizing in general, in my opinion, seems like a good way to get out of the bureaucratic hell and start enabling some actual good governance. The country is divided and it's not going to get any better. With the massive crackdown that's happening on Trumpism within Silicon Valley and of course the media, things are going to get worse and worse and worse. Liberals are in power. They tend to overreach, and so I'd expect maybe 4 years of that exact notion playing out to the most extreme degree that we've ever seen, considering hyperpartisanship is at a level that it's never been at. And I think a Joe Biden presidency as a whole for the Democrats is more about payback than it is about Joe Biden. It's more about political retribution and revenge than it is about actually supporting their candidate and his ideas. And I'd say that's quite clear. And secession is already happening. The mass exodus of Twitter is Republican secession. The mass exodus of California from Republicans leaving the state for greener pastures in Tennessee and Texas is secession. A lot of people say that it's blue voters that are migrating over and turning Texas more blue, but we didn't necessarily see that in the 2020 election, now did we? Austin, Houston, Dallas, of course, are blue, but the state as a whole is definitely more Republican and pretty much just as Republican as it was in 2016. And what do you have to lose by seceding? I don't think you have anything to lose. You get more control over your local economy, more control over trade, taxes, regulation, everything, and you don't have to deal with the absolute hyper-partisan mess and Republican GOP establishment type officials from other states who don't represent you and your own in-state priorities whatsoever, and so you can actually govern. It's just a mess. Just like the EU is an absolute mess, and I can pretty much guarantee you that the UK is going to be much better off controlling their own trade and their own economic interests, their own borders, after leaving the grasp of the unelected bureaucrats of the EU, which once again do not represent them and their own local interests. If you want to represent small government, if you want to represent sovereignty, populism, in my opinion, secession is the only way. The GOP continues to backstab you, and there's no way it's getting any better anytime soon. I can pretty much promise you that one. And so the question that I want to leave you guys with, actually a couple questions. The first one is, should Texas or any other Republican state secede from the US? And the second is, what happens with the GOP? Should establishment neocons be primaried? Is that even a sustainable model whatsoever, considering you're probably going to primary establishment neocons replaced with future establishment neocons once they get corrupted by the money? Should a third party be launched, which of course is a long-term vision? Where do we go from here is really the question, and let me know what you guys think in the comment section. But that's what I got for you on this one. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, please make sure to leave a like, a comment, subscribe, share the video as much as possible. We are still shadow banned by the YouTube algorithm, and in general, the liberal hive mind is on a serious decline, so share the video as much as possible. I want to thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.